Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Namaste. How are you doing? Now, again, before we begin, then it's really beneficial for us to remind ourselves of exactly why we are engaging in the spiritual path. And especially if you have a Mahayana motivation, that wish to achieve awakening for the benefit of all beings throughout limitless space, then this can also help you not to get downhearted or despondent. Because this itself is an enormous task. It's not something that's easy to do. I mean, even to help one single sentient being is difficult to really bring benefit in this life. So if we've got this really vast motivation, then you can see right away that this isn't something easy to achieve. And that will help you to remain kind of focused and not to get downhearted if you don't see immediate progress in your practice. I mean, it's also possible that by wishing to benefit all sentient beings and seeing how difficult it is that you might become downhearted. There is the story of Chenrezig, where originally Chenrezig was a bodhisattva and made this commitment to help all sentient beings. And after working tirelessly, then Chenrezig looked into the expanse, infinite expanse, and saw that there were still infinite sentient beings that needed to be helped, and gave rise to a small moment of despondency, and then his head and body split into 1,000 pieces, is what it's told. So it's a big task, but we've got to start small and work our way up. So I suppose we'll get into the questions. Okay, good day, everyone. Hello, Arthur. As you know, India is the origin of Buddhism. But why there were less Buddhist population? Was there war between Brahmanism and Buddhism? Okay, this is a very good question. And we can say that India was the place in which Buddhism originated, although the Buddha was born in what is called Nepal. But in those days there was no India and there was no Nepal, so it's fair to say. But the Buddha achieved enlightenment in sort of Bihar, I suppose we could say, modern day Bihar in India. And so we could say that's when the first Dharma appeared in our realm, in our universe. Now, this question as to why Buddhism has basically disappeared in India. Now, this happened quite a long time ago. There was a big change, there was a big shift. And the suggestion here, the questioner, is that it was primarily because of a war between Brahmanism and Buddhism. Well, there was conflict, and in the Buddhist scriptures, then it teaches about these three principal causes for the downfall of the Buddha Dharma. And one of these is the conflict between the Buddhists and a Hindu or Brahmin king. But if we look at the historical record, then it coincides very closely with the invasion into northern India and the Gangetic plains by these Muslim sort of horseback forces. And they came in across the north of India from Gandavar, this sort of kingdom like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then there's this huge plain that runs around the foot of the Himalayan mountains. And so these horsemen could move very, very quickly right through India, and they eventually came to the area of Nalanda. I mean, you can get all this on Wikipedia, basically. And the Muslims originally had mistaken these Buddhist monks for Brahmins, is what they said in their own history. There is a history of this. It still exists. There was a traveler who went with the forces, the Muslim forces, and he recorded a lot of the details. And for example, in Nalanda, which was our biggest college, it was a massive university with thousands of monks. And also Nalanda is the origin of Buddhism that went to Tibet. Then basically in one day or in 48 hours, they killed all the monks. They executed every single monk and completely wiped out the entire community and burnt down the library. So that was like the end of the intensive study of Buddhism. But if we look at the history, we can see that it had already been in decline for a long time. I think there was some record in around the 15th century. And as I said, there was this Persian kingdom, sort of Afghanistan, Pakistan, this sort of area. It was a very prominent kingdom. And there used to be discourses between different religions. So, Muslim leaders would come together with Buddhists and Hindus, and everyone would discuss philosophy, and this went on for a long time. But sometime around the 15th century, there was a traveler who made an account, and in that he said, aside from a few old men preaching the Buddha Dharma, I didn't meet any learned people at that time. So in the past, there would have been many panditas and scholars, but by the time this traveler had come to Persia, then they only met a few old beggars, basically, who weren't learned. They were just sort of repeating stuff that they'd heard in order to beg for money. And as we know, before the sort of modern era, then probably there were less than 0.5% of Indians were Buddhists, very small percent. There was a recent mass conversion of lower caste Buddhists, lower caste Hindus into Buddhism. Dr. Ambankar. And this increased the Buddhist population in India in recent times. But up until then, it had almost disappeared. In fact, the place where the Buddha had become enlightened, which is this sort of Bodh Gaya, what we call the Vajra seat in Bihar, in the plains of northern India, then in recent times, it had been used as a Hindu temple for many, many, centuries. It'd been given, the control of that had been given over to a rich landowner who was a Brahmin, and it had been used as a temple for Shiva, and it had fallen into great disrepair. So it was largely because of the British Empire and the money and influence they had that they could restore this temple back to a Buddhist place of worship. I mean, it's not like it ever was lost, and had to be rediscovered, because there are accounts of, for example, envoys from the king of Burma and from Sri Lanka traveling to Bodh Gaya to pay their respects. And there are these accounts where they said how sad it was that the whole place had fallen into disrepair. So this had been going on for centuries and centuries. Really, even 11th and 12th century, then the Buddhism had more or less disappeared from most of India. We know there's some places like this Maharashtra in Pune and what we call Bombay is a strong Buddhist community. The reason why it survived in Sri Lanka is because around the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, before Christ, then King Ashoka had sent a kind of colonists, and they were bringing the Theravada tradition to Sri Lanka. And that was because at that time it was in danger of dying out. So that was a long time ago, right? The original tradition of the Buddhist community of living sort of in the forest and begging in villages, by that time it almost died out. This is the time of King Ashoka. And there had been a kind of geopolitical change in the Indian subcontinent. And the surviving Buddhists were the Mahayanists. And it's because they were patronized by the kings. So there was this sort of royal court. And there was this shift from the Buddhist monks being supported by poor villagers who were farmers to being supported by, rich kings. And the thing is this Theravada tradition was still based on taking these alms from the villages, and they were in danger of dying out. Their tradition almost disappeared. And so they moved to Sri Lanka and sort of, they also took a sapling from the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, so that they could plant one in Sri Lanka. And they reestablished their tradition, the Theravada tradition, in the south. And then they had to make a decision. This is something that this Jagara had talked about in the interview the other day, that they made this conscious decision to primarily focus on the scriptures. It's not like they abandoned meditation, but they put most of their efforts into preserving the scriptures. And that's why our earliest Buddhist texts are in Pali. It's not because they were the original teachings, it's because it was the first time they were written down. And the reason for that is they had to write them down because they were in fear of losing the tradition altogether. So this is already 2nd or 3rd century, it was a long time ago. And the Buddha predicted all of this. The Buddha gave a time frame of 5 periods in which the Buddha Dharma would decline. And in the end, then you would merely have, the signs and symbols as sort of a progression. There's this sort of time of this attainment, time of practice, etc. And at the end, then there's just mere semblance of the Buddha Dharma. And there's a lot of debate as to where we are right now. The way that it's described, quite funnily, is that in the end of the Buddha Dharma, then there will be monkeys on thrones teaching Buddhism. And so when I hear that, I sort of think, well, I'm that monkey. You know, this is like somebody pretending to teach the Dharma. Now, if you look at what the anthropologists say, and then they suggest that the reason why Buddhism was wiped out, whereas this Brahmin tradition, the Hindu tradition, survived, is because the Hindus were much more willing to kind of not bow down, but to accommodate the Muslim tradition. So they would basically take on the Muslim religion, but keep practicing their Hindu tradition. And so Hinduism kind of survived, whereas the Buddhists had taken a vow not to follow any other teachers. It's not certain exactly why the Muslims completely wiped out the Buddhists. I think it's because they were better established. For example, when they came to Nalanda, they thought it was a fortress. They didn't realize it was just a university. I mean, they couldn't understand, right? There's thousands of monks, you know, no weapons, anything, living in this kind of castle-like structure. It was a massive structure. If you look on Wikipedia, you can still see the ruins of Nalanda. It was massive. A huge library, right? You know, maybe millions of books. And when they got there, they thought it was a fortress. And so they went in and they killed them all, and they thought they were Brahmins. But it was because they were kind of institutionalized, I think. That's my guess anyway. It seemed more substantial, whereas the Hindu tradition was kind of, you know, guys going between villages and doing village rites and doing fire pujas and that sort of thing. And this is also explains a lot of why Buddhism changed and why we have Vajrayana Buddhism. We have this outer appearance of Buddhism to be very similar to Tantric Hindu tradition. So people think, well, Buddhism is just a continuation of that. So it takes on the outer form of the Hindu Tantric practice, but there's a huge difference in terms of view, and you can see that right away. But I mean, getting into view is something that's quite difficult. I've made quite a few videos about this. It's not an easy point. And sadly, it seems that this trend is continuing. There's been this temporary kind of improvement in Buddhism, and that's mainly because China opened up again. China opened up to religion after outlawing religion for many years, and now the most Buddhists in the world live in China. There's something like 300 million Buddhists. But this is something I've talked about before. If you look at these 4 seals that signify the true Dharma, these 4 main points that you can use to define whether someone is a Buddhist or not, then really most Buddhists aren't really Buddhists. They're only nominally Buddhist. That means they take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but their view is not really a Buddhist view. And this is another reason I think why Buddhism has difficulty in propagating, because it's very difficult to understand. And in terms of philosophy, then really it's kind of the most modern or advanced form of, let's say, philosophical tenet. And again, to get into exactly why that is difficult, but it's the only position that is compatible with, for example, quantum uncertainty. I hope to make more videos on this point, but it's kind of difficult, because to start off with, half the people, when you start talking about quantum physics and stuff, they just accept it blindly, as if, you know, the Buddha created quantum physics or something like that. I think there's an American teacher who's made a lot of money out of this kind of quantum consciousness thing, where he sort of blended quantum physics with the Hindu tradition, this non-dual Hindu tradition, and it sounds all very convincing. And I think that's a danger. The reason why it's a danger is because these quantum physics is a theory, right? And theories are always superseded. So, for example, I heard one a Tibetan Buddhist teacher who was basically suggesting that the Buddha had invented string theory. But things are always evolving, right? And also, it seems like there's a lot of backlash against the string theory, and very eminent physicists and mathematicians, for example, like Roger Penrose, is refuting string theory. And it's quite likely that in 10 years it'll be superseded or seen to have been a mistaken view. For example, they believe in 11 dimensions, etc. It's not something that's ever been proven. And so let's say we say, oh yes, well actually, you know, Jesus Christ invented string theory, and then 10 years down the line they find that string theory is false, and you're stuck, right? You've kind of tried to attribute some advanced modern theory to your old spiritual tradition, and it will backfire on you. So it's our tendency is to want to do these sort of things. So anyway, what was I saying? I was saying that the trend for Buddhism to decline is getting worse. And there's this temporary increase in the amount of Buddhists in the world because of the situation in China. But there's two main factors. One is that the Buddhist tenet is extremely difficult to understand. And so without understanding that, then it's difficult to gain realization. Without gaining realization, then as I said before, this transmission of realization and transmission of the scriptures cannot continue. The scriptures will continue because they've all been codified and translated into many languages, and now they're in libraries and databases and all that sort of thing. But there's fewer and fewer people who are gaining realization. And this is exacerbated or made worse by the situation where everybody thinks awakening is something quite commonplace and easy to do. So they've kind of lost the plot. They've taken their eye off the ball, and they've identified some completely mundane transformation as awakening, and thinking that's the real deal. Then they're investing all their time in that, right? So there's fewer people who are actually going through the effort to come to realize what it was that the Buddha was actually teaching. And so the suggestion is that in 50 years, then the Muslim tradition will be the largest number of followers in the world by quite a bit, and that Christianity will continue to grow. In decline are things like Judaism, and also Buddhism will be in serious decline. So the first reason, it's very difficult to understand. The second reason is that it kind of discourages people from having lots of children because if you're a layperson, and then the Buddha says, well, don't be desirous, you take temporary vows. And so it seems to be that in Buddhist countries that the birth rate reduces. And so in numbers, and we will decline anyway. But my understanding really is that the Buddhists have always been in the minority anyway, from the very get-go. And the Buddha himself had said, or the Buddha herself, whatever you want to say, had said that Buddhism would disappear. And depending on how you calculate this, then it already happened, it's already gone. Probably the primary way of calculating this would be based on 5 periods of sort of 500 years. And so that would more or less, that would be pretty much right in terms of Buddhism. There's another way of calculating it that would have only lasted up until the first or middle of the second millennia, 1500s or something like that. And if that's the case, then that model would really be accurate for India, for example. Buddhism basically disappeared from India. So if we take this teaching of the Buddha to mean that within this time period, then Buddhism will disappear as it was, its original form. For example, the Theravada Sangha living in the forests and begging from their villagers in India, then that's already happened. But as we know, then it's spread to Sri Lanka and Thailand and other places. It's sad. I think it's sad because, to me, Buddhism is really needed in the modern world. I mean, in general, religion is needed. I mean, we don't need more people fighting over religion, but we need some sort of basis for belief in morality, on beliefs in karma, for example, belief in karma, cause and effect is very useful for us. It stops us from engaging in all kinds of terrible acts. So Arthur asks a question: how important is shamatha developing vipassana? Now that's a great question. So there's 2 ways of developing vipassana. One is through generating really damn good shamatha. This is one way. Creating intensely stable mental condition, right? So shamatha increases our stillness of mind and our ability to concentrate. If you increase that greatly, let's say you reach the 2nd or 3rd stage of mental abiding, then you have a very good chance of recognizing the true nature, because the mind is very focused and still. The problem with understanding the essential nature of mind is that we're always vacillating. In the Hindu tradition, we talk about this chitta vritti, which means the mind is fluctuating, right? Fibrillating. And so without stillness and without concentration, then it's very difficult to gain this insight. So that's one way. And the other way, well, it's divided into 2, let's say. There's the way of the Dzogchen and there's the way of the Mahamudra. And in the Dzogchen, then what they do is they teach the view. So they teach the view, how things are, and the way that the Dzogchen uses language is actually quite poetic. So it's not very technical sounding. It all sounds really beautiful and poetic. And so you teach the view, and then by repeatedly kind of focusing on this view, and then you look for insight, and you get these sudden moments of insight. And it's not like you'll just go, oh, that's it over there. It's not like that. You get kind of these little glimpses that you don't understand, but they kind of persist. And the more that you do that, then eventually you might have a sustained recognition of the true nature. In the Mahamudra tradition, what we do is we use meditation. So we use all these different types of meditation techniques, right? And then use those as a springboard to come to recognize the true nature. So in terms of Arthur's question, you don't actually need good shamatha for vipassana. Developing shamatha first is a way of recognizing this insight. And also you can develop insight through these techniques of the view or through meditation without developing shamatha. But what is certain is that once you have recognition, then you need to remain in that. So at that point, once you have recognition, well, you're going to need to develop your shamatha, because you need to be able to focus on that, remain focused on that. And of course, your kleshas, your negative habitual tendencies, are always going to be drawing you away from the true nature, right? You've recognized the way things are, but you've got these bad habits, and they're always drawing you away. It's just like somebody who's addicted to cigarettes. They know it's bad for them, it's going to kill them, the doctor tells them it's going to give them cancer, etc. But they get this urge and they've just got to grab a cigarette, right? It's kind of like that. We're addicted to samsara. So you could recognize insight without any shamatha. I mean, it can happen just through symbols or certain causes and conditions, like something really bad happens to you or near-death experience, and you could recognize it, you know. But once you've recognized it, you've got to do something with it. You still have to erode your negative habitual tendencies. You've got no choice. And so at that point, you need to develop your shamatha. But there's something else here. And that's because focusing on the true nature as your object is a far more powerful meditation for developing shamatha than focusing on a candle or focusing on the breath. So we could spend years and years and years focusing on a candle to still the mind. But once you have recognition, you can spend one session, you know. They say like one instant of resting in the true nature is more powerful than eons of positive karma. So, but you could get the wrong idea and think that, well, I'll just go for the direct path, right? I'll just go for recognition first. It's not easier. It's taught to be more difficult. So you could just waste a lot of time. And then you don't have shamatha and you don't have insight either, right? You don't have this, either of them. You haven't got shamatha, you haven't got vipassana. So the best thing to do is to spend a lot of time on your shamatha meditation, regardless, because it's always going to benefit you. As I said before, even if you're focusing on a mistaken object, it's still beneficial to your shamatha, as long as you don't cling to it as being the real deal. If you cling to this, you get bliss in your mind and you think, oh, that's the true nature, and you focus on it, and you think that's it, then you'll never look any further, right? But if you're focusing on it, all the while you're developing your mental acuity and your stillness. How can having a more clear and concentrated mind help with insight? Like I said, it doesn't help insight. In fact, insight doesn't depend on any of these things. You know, you could be foggy, you can be asleep. Somebody who's got really good insight meditation can fall asleep. You know? Somebody who understands meditation, let's say they're meditating with their lama, and their lama's meditating and he kind of dozes off. Somebody who understands meditation will think, ooh, he's doing something special there. But somebody who doesn't understand meditation will be thinking, oh, look at him, he's falling asleep. He tells us we have to stay awake. So it's hard to explain, but once you have insight, then that insight applies to everything, right? We say it's the true nature of all phenomena. It's the essence of everything, right? It's the nature of mind. So it's the nature of mind when it's distracted. It's the nature of mind when it's focused, when it's clear, when it's unclear. In fact, these notions of clarity and sort of dullness don't apply once you understand what the true nature is. So the short answer is, well, it doesn't matter if you have insight. But how are you going to get insight? That's the problem. So my suggestion to you is spend a hell of a lot of time on your shamatha and be very diligent. And don't listen to people who are just telling you, you know, oh, it doesn't matter, you're already Buddha, you don't have to do anything. They've misunderstood, you know. They're just repeating a lot of garbage they've heard that they don't understand. And if you follow that, you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, if you're a really neurotic person who's got a lot of anxiety and you think too much, and somebody tells you, just calm down, it's fine. It's pretty much the same as saying, you're a Buddha already, don't worry. You know, it's a good way to start. You know, start off with being less kind of neurotic. But if you're serious about what you want to do, then you have to put the effort in. There's no other way. You know, if somebody can tell me, you know, just take it easy, you don't need to do anything, I'm not going to listen to them. You know, I know that's just going to be a waste of time. Just put my feet up. Yeah. So that's his question. So the insight is independent of any sort of stability. Yes, it is. But once you have insight, well, you need to rest in it. You need to remain with that. So you need stability. Yeah. You could recognize the true nature of mind and just be like wandering around like a sort of, you know, a kid in a candy shop, and it's not going to get you anywhere, right? We've been doing that since the beginning of this time. In fact, this insight is continually arising in every moment, and we don't recognize it. It doesn't do us any good, you know. It's not like it's something that has to be invented or developed. It's there. And I've said before, then there's two, right? There's this placement meditation of shamatha. That's conditioning. That's what we call conditioning. This is something that this Jagara was talking about in meditation. And then there's insight. Well, insight is really about, or this means of developing insight is really about deconditioning. So there's two. The shamatha is about conditioning yourself to stillness and focus, and insight is about removing these thick layers of conceptual imputations, these mistaken ideas. And to do that, there's all kinds of different techniques. And it doesn't depend on just focusing on something, but using a focal object is helpful, helps you to center your mind. Oh, hello, Naveen. I was wondering what happened to you. I've been thinking that you made a comment like about 3 or 4 months ago, and I haven't seen you since. So welcome. Nice to see you again. How do we know if the guru is an authentic master that we can rely on for the true Dharma, especially in the West, where there is so much Dharma practitioners and Dharma teachers? Okay, so this is a really good question. You know, I don't really know Naveen, but his questions get to the point, really. This is like so fundamental. When we think we can go without a teacher, whatever you like to call them, right? Teacher, guru. People kind of are triggered by this term sometimes, guru. I think the reason for that is because of all the gurus who have behaved in such terrible ways in the past and have kind of taken advantage of people. What you have to understand is like in India, a guru is a bit like not really a pop star. They're kind of a celebrity, you would say. Like they're a celebrity that you get. You know, they're very similar to a life coach, but it's kind of part of the tradition. And there's sort of guru, like as we call a lama, and the use of this term lama in the Tibetan means no higher, or highest, you could say the highest mother. It's like highest source. And then there's guru in terms of this kind of guru worship tradition. And for the most part in India, then the student-guru relationship is similar to the relationship between a rock star and their fans. You know, of course these people can inspire us, right? We could be really inspired by Jimi Hendrix and think he's teaching some wonderful spiritual path. But it's kind of, we're kind of groupies to gurus often. But that's not really the real meaning of an authentic master. The authentic master is the person who has the ability to transform your mind, you know, for you to make a spiritual transformation. And that's largely to do with your past karmic connection. And really the best masters aren't like superstars. We think a good guru is like a superstar, you know, a rock star or a famous actor or something like that. But the best authentic masters are more like a wounded deer in the forest. You know, they lie low, they hide away. And if you listen to all the old stories, then that's how it is. So in general, when you see a guru who's really flashy and really wealthy, then that's almost 100% certain they're not authentic, unfortunately. And I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing people, for example, like Sadhguru and things like that. I really don't know anything about Sadhguru. And he seems like, he's really funny. And also he's kind of switched on about the sort of kind of pitfalls and mistakes that people get into. He's no dummy. And he's kind of very aware of this guru-student relationship. And I guess he's probably trying his best. Most of these teachers online are trying their best. You know, Rupert Spira, Eckhart Tolle. They really, they're quite sincere. And then people like Sadhguru, etc., then they fall into a different category because there's this whole tradition. For example, we've got Osho, right? Well, he's very much connected with Nepal. And in Nepal, this guru worship thing is very, very strong. And people just give away their entire life and everything they own. Actually, the Chinese do this as well. But often for people, they can do that for a long time, and then down the line, some point, they give rise to regret, you know. They think like, well, I gave away all my money. I've got nothing now, and I haven't achieved anything. But this path of guru worship isn't one that's going to lead to realizing the true nature of mind or any kind of great spiritual attainment. In this format, I mean. This kind of rock star format, that's what I mean. Because of course then, you know, Milarepa had this kind of guru-student, guru worship relationship with Marpa. But that was very personal and one-to-one, you know. And at the time, it wasn't like Milarepa was famous. Marpa was a little bit famous. He didn't have loads of students. He had like 4 principal students or something. It's only later that we see that these people became so important to the transmission of the lineage. So when you've got these kind of career gurus, these kind of life coaches, they're really the celebrities, then what you're aiming for there is by giving up all your attachment and giving everything away to the guru, then you're creating lots of positive karma. If you're well-intentioned, right? If you're doing it, if it's not transactional, then by that you create lots and lots of positive karma. And if you're very pure about it, then you also become very accepting, open, and then you experience well-being in this life. And what is taught, then you're reborn in divine realms in future lives. But it's not for somebody who wants to come to understand the true nature of mind or to attain spiritual accomplishment for themselves, this kind of practice. If you find your, what they call your guru of many lifetimes, and you do whatever they say and work with great diligence, then yes, you will achieve great things in the Dharma. For example, Milarepa achieved the level of Dorje Chang. He became a Buddha in this lifetime, and it was based on this interaction. But it wasn't this sort of celebrity interaction. So, I mean, I made a video about this, how to find an authentic master, and there's kind of signs. And you have to look at the people around a teacher. For example, I'd heard something online, somebody was teaching. It was a kind of philosophical position that I didn't understand. It was this notion that you could take the infinite and you could divide it, right, by the finite, and then you would end up with a finite. And I wondered, you know, well, if you take infinity and you divide it by a finite number, do you still have infinity or do you have a finite number? And if you have a finite number, then it wasn't infinity in the first place, right? So it was just, you know, I was just wondering what they would say. But 2 of the students got extremely angry and were actually being derogatory, you know. They called my monk's robes a clown suit or something like that. For example, if we went into town and we saw, you know, a Sikh guy getting on the bus to go to work, and we were to say, what are you wearing that clown hat for? We'd probably get arrested, right? It's like really, really out of order, that kind of behavior, sort of to discriminate against somebody for their religious beliefs or for their outward signs of religion. I mean, it happens, right? You know, people throw stuff at Muslims wearing their kind of the gear they have. I don't have that reaction. When I see somebody outwardly expressing their faith or belief in their religion, it's, to me, it's a positive thing. But anyway, so you look at students, and if these students are very small-minded and very easy to anger, then that's a sign that there's something going wrong there. Because in general, then students reflect the teachings of their teacher. You know, you can look, especially if you look at the people who are close to a teacher, then you will see what that teacher is like. And if they're quite humble, kind and caring people, and then that's one good sign. And then also you have to see if what they teach has substance to it. And this is also, I see this online all the time. There'll be a kind of question and answer with a teacher, somebody famous, and there's quite a few of them online on YouTube, right? And somebody will say, well, I don't understand this point. What's that all about? Now, if the teacher says, no, you're wrong, it's like this, that's kind of a sign that they don't really have confidence in their own position, because they can't really explain why they believe what they believe. All they can do is sort of point out a fault in the person asking the question, especially if that's a good question. I've often seen this. This one student asked a question and said, well, you teach that consciousness is without any qualities. It's completely void of anything, but that everything comes from consciousness. And I don't understand how appearances and things can arise from something that doesn't have qualities, because obviously this quality to allow something to arise must be a quality, right? It's not absent of a quality. Now, this is not a stupid question. That's a very profound question. And it's similar if you ask, well, where did the Big Bang come from? Is it necessary to have energy or matter pre-existent before the Big Bang? And, a scientist or physicist may say the universe came from the Big Bang, but if you press them on this question, then they will have to admit that, well, actually the laws of the universe have to be already there for this to work. And not only that, then there's a certain amount of matter or energy required. Bare minimum, there's a certain amount that you need. And so if you ask difficult questions of your teachers, and then the conversation becomes more profound, that's generally a good sign. But if, for example, in this case, then the teacher didn't know how to answer and got quite obviously frustrated, in the end, the only thing the teacher could say was, well, no, you're wrong. It's not like that. It's like this, without actually answering the question. And so it's generally like that. And often we think, an authentic teacher is somebody who has strange behavior, right? They kind of act like the Siddha, as I told before. Now, Siddha is like an accomplished master. So they used to do weird things, right? Dancing in the marketplace naked, etc. Now, just because somebody has strange behavior doesn't mean they're a charlatan. But there should be something behind that. And many of these very popular celebrity teachers, they kind of act it up a bit because Westerners like it. So they'll wear funny clothing or, big sunglasses covered in diamonds and that sort of thing. And it's because we like this sort of stuff. To us, it's kind of a game, really. So there needs to be some substance behind that, The Dalai Lama jokes around a lot, and it gets him into trouble sometimes, but he jokes around a lot. But behind his joking, there is definitely substance. You can ask him about anything, any position that he has, and he will be able to explain it in such detail that it will make your head spin, because he's incredibly learned. He's no fool. He's thought about everything he has to say. So it's important that there is some substance to a teacher. And you have to look at what teachers focus on as well. Now, I don't know, I've never met Osho. This guy I'm going to interview on Thursday actually has experience with Osho. I'm going to ask him some questions. I don't know anything about Osho. I mean, on the outside, it looks like a kind of spiritual Disneyland to me. But I mean, he's passed away now, so maybe that's just his kind of committee it's making it like that. But he seemed to be pretty keen on wealth, right? He had like a diamond Rolex, like the most expensive watch in the world, loads of limousines, and he was covered head to toe in expensive stuff. He seemed to really love all that stuff. That's part of this kind of guru worship tradition in Nepal. It's very much like that. But by looking at what a teacher focuses on, then you can generally tell what they're like. So Tetra Rinpoche, for example, spent all his money. When I say all his money, it's like $5. He didn't have anything really. But anything he got, he would use to save life, to release animals who are going to be slaughtered. And so you can see this is a sign. This Lama has compassion and love, right? And then there's people like Sandhi Nyingpa Rinpoche. He spends all his time educating people, putting money into colleges, etc., educating his students in the Buddha Dharma, and he's really learned it himself. And so this is a sign of what he's like. And so for me, then, if the Lama's main consideration is flashy cars and stuff like that, then I have no kind of choice but to accept that they're a materialist. But that's not certain. There are masters of the past who acted in strange ways, but there's a reason for that. Like somebody today made a comment about this point about getting angry and how Marpa had become angry. But if you look at the life story of Marpa, it's very clear there that he was putting on an act. I mean, in that story, he's being very terrible to Milarepa, but at some point, his heart is breaking so much for all the trouble that Milarepa is going through that he bursts out in tears or something. And it's because, you know, he, in the end, he kind of thinks, well, it's not working. He's just suffering so much. I've got to find some way to alleviate his pain. So he was kind of going through the motions in order to purify Milarepa's negative karma. So he's putting on this act of being angry. He's being really tough on him. But you have to understand that Milarepa in that lifetime had killed over 30 people, right? Murdered them with black magic. And so he needed to get enlightened in this lifetime, because if he didn't, then he was going like straight to hell for eons. And so he was desperate. Milarepa was desperate, and Marpa saw this. And Marpa had actually said to his consort, his wife, he said, you know, if you hadn't interfered, then he could have achieved enlightenment without any further hardship. But because she interfered, because she felt compassion for Milarepa, and Marpa kind of toned down his teaching a little bit, then Milarepa had to go through decades and decades in solitude with no food and no clothing. But Marpa had said he wouldn't have had to do that if he just was allowed to purify his karma through these means. So there are reasons why a Lama could be kind of really tough on their students, but in general I would say don't accept that, you know, unless you find a teacher you have absolute 100% confidence in, because there's loads of people who just use this as an excuse to take advantage of their students, and it happens loads, right, in these spiritual communities. It's very, very sad. And that's why it's really important not to give rise to pride, and not to start taking money off people and stuff like that. You just start thinking you're really special, and that you know, you could never do any wrong. And then in the end, you know, if you give rise to desire and just use people, then it's only going to harm them. It's only going to harm you as well. So his question continues, showing signs of strong self-grasping, and this Sangha still focuses on the mundane world of samsara, which is an illusion in itself. So the Dharma is not being discussed in the Sangha. I'm not exactly sure what this question means, but they are showing signs of strong self. Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, this is it. You have to see how the teacher acts, and also how their community acts, you know. And it's based on that. And you should spend a lot of time investigating. You should watch my video on this point. I discussed all these issues in great depth. But you do have to investigate. I mean, they say it's like not investigating the teachers like jumping from a precipice, and not investigating the students like drinking poison. It's so true. If you take on students and you haven't checked them out first, and what does that mean? See they're sincere, what their motivation is, you know. For those students, it might just be purely transactional. And it's the same with the teacher. So you should take your time first to investigate a teacher, and only once you have confidence, and then rely on them. Of course, it's different for your Dharma friends. Dharma friends are able to rely on each other with less kind of risks involved. Somebody says, I pay homage to the 3 jewels. Oh, that's a Dharma bird. Yes, wonderful. So this is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Naveen clarifies, my main question is, how do we know if the Guru is authentic, and how can we find a true master? The first step you need to do is you need to make aspiration. You have to make this firm wish to meet your teacher of this life. And it's primarily based on that, then opportunities will arise. You don't have to think about some mystical process of making prayer to God. But when you make this commitment and you reinforce it, what happens is your eyes are open. You're always waiting to recognize the Guru of your life. And then you will have a much better chance. In Milarepa's own life story then, he met Marpa, but didn't realize it was Marpa. Milarepa was searching for the Guru of his life. When he first heard the name Marpa Lotsawa, then he sort of went into a kind of trance kind of thing, the way they explain it. And then he went searching for him. And he came to this area of, Lodrak, where he's from, and he met a farmer. And this farmer was actually Marpa, but Marpa didn't reveal himself. And Milarepa said, I'm looking for Marpa. And Marpa was saying, well, I'll go get him for you, but you mow this field for me. And he gave him a bottle of beer, this kind of keg of beer, and left. Now, Milarepa didn't realize that was Marpa, but because of that, he had this kind of, he spaced out. He nearly fainted, right? He had this kind of special feeling. It was the same with Gampopa when he met Milarepa, or when he approached Milarepa. And so by making this aspiration, you're kind of open to recognizing that. And then your kind of, we could say, inner heart will speak to you. So aspiration is really, really, really important. And then on top of that, then you have to kind of sincere and apply yourself. And you should always make the 7 branches, right? So these offerings and prostrations, all these things. Engage in virtue, whatever that be, or engage in your practice, because it's by engaging in your practice that these doors will open. This is something I found in my own life in the past. You know, the things work themselves out once you've made that commitment, and when you start applying yourself, then karma kind of ripens. Well, that's what happened for me. And it's this ripening of karma which will take care of things. Everything will go along almost spontaneously. However, if you're not sincere, if you're lazy, if you've got mixed motivations or mixed with self-concern, then you'll get taken away down false paths. And that's what's happening to most people these days. Really, their motivation is, I want to be happy. I want to escape my suffering. They're only thinking about themselves and not others. And so they meet these teachers who say, you don't have to worry, you're all in Buddha, there's nothing to do. You know, just listen to me, give me a bit of money, and you'll have a wonderful experiences of peace and well-being. And it's transactional. So that's what you get. You're getting what you asked for. But if you're looking for transcendence, to transcend the mundane world, and not only that, to do it, to make the world, let's say, better for everyone else, or if you're a Mahayanist, then to liberate all beings from samsara, then that on its own is going to take care of itself. But also have worldly caution. You know, take a second, third look. Also speak to people who know that teacher. You know, when they say something, don't accept it, analyze it. And then once you're confident that what they're saying is sound, doesn't seem to be any faults, then you should proceed. This is my own experience in this life. I always had this inclination towards Buddhism, even though I'd never even met a Buddhist really in my hometown. I had this feeling, and what it was is that I would hear things that the Buddha had said, and they would always make sense and ring true. And even when I heard explanations that came from science, there was always something missing there. For example, everything started with the Big Bang. The first thing that came to my mind was, where did the Big Bang come from? Where did this, this one-dimensional ball of energy come from? And so I could see that was just a temporary answer. It was provisional. And when I heard the teachings of the Buddha, then they always rang true. And so after many years of doing this, eventually I took the plunge and I committed myself to the Buddhist path and I took refuge. And that's kind of a pretty good way of doing it. Paul, you are no monkey. Yes, I am. Could you please talk about the Maitreya and how close in the future? Okay. So Maitreya is said to be in our tradition anyway, is Taisita Rinpoche, right? So Maitri, this is interesting because Maitreya is a 10th level bodhisattva. And the way it was taught for the Buddha is that the Buddha was actually enlightened for a long time, in the Mahayana anyway, the Lalita Vastara Sutra, right? Then the Buddha was already enlightened and was waiting in kind of heavenly realms until the human realm, then their karma was ripened. So if you kind of study the old text, then it talks a lot about this relationship between the Buddha and Maitreya. And it's like Maitreya is already enlightened, already Buddha, but it's kind of just waiting until the time is ripe. And if we look at the chronologically, then it's a long time in the future. I think once I heard Taisita Rinpoche say something like 150,000 years. So Buddhists don't come very often. And they say, for example, if you take your vows from Taisita Rinpoche, then you'll be reborn in Maitreya's kind of entourage at the time of the future Buddha. But it's a long way away. And before then, things are going to get a lot worse. I mean, they're getting worse, aren't they? Again, this is about aspirations. It's about the Bodhisattva's aspirations. What they do is they do two things. They make these aspirations to purify, make their pure realms, and also to kind of ripen beings. And these dictate these two types of activity, this sort of achievement of the Dharmakaya and the achievement of the kind of Formkaya, the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya. One that works for the benefit of others, and one that works for own benefit. And these two benefits are basically the same. But the Buddha, his realization, the achievement of the Dharmakaya, was this self-benefit, because you transform yourself into a Buddha. And then this Nirmanakaya, or Rupakaya, this Formkaya, is that which emanates for the benefit of beings, kind of brings them along the path. And so we have to make aspirations to meet Maitreya and to follow this future Buddha. But basically, you're going to be waiting a long time. So you've got a lot of time to get your house in order, to do your practice. And the good news is that if you, in this lifetime, in this moment, you fix your intention and you kind of commit yourself to that, then in lifetime after lifetime, you're going to progress. You're going to go in the positive direction. Of course, there's some pitfalls along the way, but overall, especially if you have the right motivation and you reinforce that motivation, then ultimately you will have the good karma to meet the future Buddha. And it might not seem as long as it is, right? Although it's like 150,000 years into the future or something, then it's not like you will always be reborn in the human realm. Somebody who dedicates themselves to virtue might be reborn in the form realms, and then the time scale is different. And so, anyway, we've been around since beginningless time, right? We've been around in other universes. Like we talk about this multiverse. Well, this is something that the Buddha was always talking about. There's all these different types of universes. There's these dark universes that have no Buddhas, and this one is called a fortunate universe in which there will be 1,000 Buddhas. So, it's like basically we've been going around in samsara, bumping into bodhisattvas and meeting Buddhas. But the question is, well, why aren't we enlightened and why did they get enlightened? And it's very much down to this point about aspiration and dedication, dedicating ourselves to the path. So if you start from there, and there's no worries, you're eventually, you're going to meet your goal. And even in this life, it becomes apparent. I'd always been thinking about spiritual path, but I never dedicated myself. But when I made that decision, I dedicated myself, and things changed significantly. It was quite obvious to me how things can progress on a kind of different time scale or frame. Anyway, thank you, Paul, for saying I'm not a monkey. But, we're like 99% genetically the same or something, aren't we? Thanks for the answer. I am towards path to accepting Buddhism. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's good. I like your way of thinking. Is it walkie-talkie? That I'm coming to accept Buddhism or aspiring towards it. That's a good way of thinking. Don't jump into anything. Think about it well. Something might be better for you. We've got Giorgio's Soul, Conscious Relaxation Awareness. Sounds great. By grace. Well, we don't believe in grace in the Buddha Dharma, but we do believe in blessings. But you have to understand that blessings isn't like somebody, like some Buddha, comes by and sprinkles us with water. The Buddha said that these hands cannot wash away your sins, and this realization cannot be transferred into you. And what blessing is sort of, we're self-blessed. Blessing arises from our intentions, our motivation. And then we start to see things differently. Arthur says, in your opinion, what the Hindus thought was God, Brahman, was the nature of mind, but gave it a name, or was it the clinging to the experiences of oneness that came with advanced shamatha? So this is a very good question. What you have to understand is there's no such thing as like a Buddhist. Right? Buddha didn't want people to call themselves Buddhists or be his followers. He wanted them to come to understand the truth. So, in my opinion, there are many Buddhists who aren't Buddhists, and there are probably lots of Hindus who are Buddhists. And what makes them a Buddhist or not is whether they have these 4 pillars, or these 4 seals that signify the true Dharma. And within that, then there's this recognition that things are without self-identity. And so it very much depends on that. But yes, you're right. Advanced shamatha does lead to these. And for example, regarding Brahman, then it's very specific in the ancient text, and it's taught over many different centuries and very different texts about this development of very strong shamatha. It leads to being reborn in what's called the form realm, and in the form realm we've got the Brahma realms. And being reborn in the peak of the Brahma realm, then what happens is one develops this self-illusion that one is God. Well, this is very similar to the way that many Hindu practitioners view their practice. It's reunification of God, and they become inseparable from God. And what it is explained as is that you reach this level, and then you look down at all the mundane world, because you're sort of sitting on top of the mundane world. That's metaphoric. And you look around and you think, wow, I created all of this. So it's a self-identification as God. It's like the highest level of this kind of shamatha practice, you could say. it's a bit difficult, this topic, because it's very specific. But anyway, so we could say that this is an analogy for becoming sort of self-deceived. It's developing solipsism, kind of, through deep shamatha. So through profound shamatha, you develop this sense of the infinite consciousness. And with self-identification with that, then you take yourself to be Brahman. And that's what it's taught in the Buddhist scriptures. So there are people who fall into that. There's Buddhists who fall into that. It's not really about whether you're Hindu or whether you're a Buddhist. We just use these labels. It very much depends on that individual's view and view meditation and conduct. All the shamans and lamas are teachers. Yeah, I mean, our friends are teachers. They can be bad teachers and they can be good teachers. And there's a lot of wisdom in shamanism. It's not something to be abandoned. I mean, for example, there's a lot of wisdom in the First Nations, on the native traditions, that has been kind of suppressed and lost, destroyed, and it's a shame, because we need the world. It's like we need a base to stand on. Without it, we're lost. So I heard Dzongtsar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche say that some people will purposely do something harmful to an authentic guru or master to create karmic conditions so they have a chance at enlightenment. Yeah, it's possible. But in the Tibetan tradition anyway, this could be misinterpreted. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. But if you have, let's say, your teacher of many lives, and you break your samaya, that's taught to be the biggest thing that's going to stop you from gaining spiritual progress. But there is very much this thing where lifetime after lifetime, students and teachers have this kind of, what do we call, I mean, it's a bit like in relationships, a husband and wife are always kind of egging each other on, you go at each other. And if you look at the past stories, it's a bit like that. They'll kind of, maybe it's outwardly, maybe it's how it appears to us, the way they provoke each other. But in general, if once you've chosen a teacher, then it's really important to kind of not break your sacred commitments. And but also the Dharma is very playful, you know. My teacher is famous for being quite wrathful. And also Akon Rinpoche, another one of my teachers, is famous for being a very stern and wrathful person. But in reality, they're not. They're kittens. They're full of compassion and love. But they kind of get you going, and they're doing that on purpose. But I'd be careful on this point, not to misunderstand this. So purposely do something harmful to an authentic guru, I would say, is not going to get you anywhere. Maybe that's a misinterpretation of the teaching. You shouldn't purposely do something harmful to anybody. But it depends on what you say harm is, right? So ultimately, for example, you know, poking somebody might not be harmful. It might encourage them, you know. You might sort of try to make somebody more diligent. Like Marpa was really cruel to Milarepa outwardly, but he was doing it for his ultimate benefit. So that's not harmful, that's beneficial. But intentionally trying to harm somebody is basically what's going to make you lose your bodhisattva vow. You should never harmfully intend to harm somebody, ultimately. The first Lama who sells his Ferrari is a good teacher. It's interesting, you know. This Georgios, I don't know how to pronounce your name, sorry. Saul, we'll say. Then there's a lot of Tibetan Lamas who take money and they say, oh, I'm going to build an orphanage. I've got lots of young monks I need to feed. And they take that money and they'll buy their girlfriend a Ferrari or something. I guess they're not real Lamas, but this goes on a lot. So yeah, take your Ferrari, sell it, and use it to help people, at least in the world, if you can't help them spiritually. Fair point. I can't 100% knock this tradition, you know. I understand the basis for this guru worship thing, where everybody gives all their money to their cars and all that. I mean, the Bhutanese king and his consorts give Taisita Rinpoche lots of vehicles, and he accepts them. And Taisita Rinpoche is a very authentic teacher. But he doesn't live it up. You know, he doesn't live like a rich man. You know, he's very comfortable. But he's very diligent, and he does everything he can for the Buddha Dharma. So, you know, there is a thing to be said, is like creates good karma for the student if they make offerings to their teacher. So generosity is very good. And giving to your teacher is even better. But the best thing that you can give, the highest form of generosity, in terms of good karma, is to offer up your practice and your realization. So that means if you dedicate yourself to your practice, that's the best thing. That's what the Lama, an authentic Lama, wants you to do, is to gain spiritual realization. And so if you dedicate all your time to that, that's the best type of offering. So a Ferrari given to your teacher is somewhere way down there. It's probably not as productive as maybe feeding the poor. I'm not sure. It depends very much on your own intention. If you're kind of rich and you're very greedy and you give away lots of expensive things, it could be beneficial. What we have to understand is that really generosity is for our benefit. We tend to think that I'm giving something to the Lama. Poor Lama, he needs a pair of socks. Like my Lama, for example. The Chinese always say that because he looks really scruffy, right? And he's all got holes in his socks. So they want to give him socks or something because they feel sorry for him. But that's not really a good way to think, especially in the Tibetan Dharma. We're giving for our own benefit. I'm not going to gain much benefit for giving away a pair of socks. But if I'm really attached to my iPhone and I give that to my teacher, then it allows me to let go, right? This is really the purpose of generosity. We're trying to undo our mistaken perception of reality and our clinging to self and outer objects. Okay, better get on here. It's getting late. What was your lay life prior to monastic life? Whoa, that's a great question. It's similar in many ways because I've always been very, 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 very busy. I always do too much, and right now I'm trying to do too much. I generally have about 4 or 5 different jobs going on at the same time. But just prior to going into retreat, let's say, that's the first time I took robes. When we do the 4-year retreat, we take robes as part of that process. And it's temporary. It's not a lifelong vow. Then I had kind of transformed my life a lot. First thing I started doing, over 20 years ago, is I started, I'd given up, alcohol and drugs and addictions to cigarettes and coffee and all that sort of thing. And I started teaching yoga and getting into yoga and Tai Chi. So my kind of life was transforming to a more spiritual path. But I had children, I usually do a lot of different jobs because I've got lots of different skills. And then people are always, there's a shortage of skilled workers. So I ended up doing 2 or 3 jobs. I was always busy. And, but life was becoming kind of more spiritual. And then just prior to going into retreat, taking robes for the first time, then I was living on a boat. It was sort of this attempt to totally cut off from materialism and be kind of like a nomad, really. And then I was basically just meditating. And for that short period, I wasn't even working, really, except for this sort of part-time things here and there to make a bit of money. So it's kind of a transformation, a slow transformation. But in many ways, my life is very similar to the way it was before, because I tend to be trying to do too much. It's a great fault. You can help fewer people if you try to do too much. For example, there's a woman who's here at the moment, and she helps with my mum 3 times a week. And she's great, right? She's like working 6 days a week. She's on overtime all the time because there's all these old women and men in Canada. It's the same anywhere in the West, right? The average age is getting higher and higher, and there's less people working. And she herself isn't young. She's younger than some of the people she's helping. But a lot of her clients, patients have got Alzheimer's, they're paraplegics, etc. So she's killing herself, working all the time. And the other day, her truck broke down. And, and so of course, because she can't afford it, right? It's like, $1,500 or something to fix it. The heater cord going on, and it's a real pain. And so I said, well, I'll fix it for you. And so that, it took like 10 or 12 hours in between doing other things. And I tend to do that sort of thing all the time. And whereas it's like inconvenient, then I don't regret it, because whatever you can do to help others, you should do it, right? Of course, it's more beneficial to teach the Dharma, but it's like, I'm not like a big teacher. I don't have loads of students. So, there's the woman next door. I was helping her a bit. If I can do a little bit here and there, then that's beneficial. It's beneficial for me. And for example, if I can help this woman who's, helping so many other people, then she has less worry and she's able to do her job and help those people. So we kind of got to like help each other. We're all kind of spiritual friends, right? And so in that way, yeah, my life is pretty much the same, except for I'm wearing robes. But that also gets rid of a lot of other complications, right? Because when you're wearing robes, you don't have a partner and you don't have all these other kinds of distractions. Like I don't have to worry about what I'm going to wear today. And I don't have to worry about my hairstyle. It kind of simplifies life a little bit. I mean, it'd be great if I could be a really venerable monk and stuff like that. It's almost impossible. I'm living here with my parents, trying to help it. So I'm going to compromise. Like I said, it's a compromise. I mean, it was wonderful meeting Jagara the other day, because he'd come from the Burmese tradition. He was living in Sri Lanka, so it's very strict monastic discipline. But obviously, when he comes back here to Canada and he's living on his own in this little hut in the forest, then he's got to cook for himself. And the monks over there would never do that. But he'd said to me, you know, when the Theravadan monks, they come to the West, then they often kind of get very lax with their vows. It's like it's difficult, it's hard for them to keep them very purely. And it kind of made me feel a bit better, because really, in many ways, then it's difficult for me to keep my vows. That's not the most important thing. Your most important thing, especially in the Mahayana, is your motivation. And so we have to do our best to focus on what's important. We're all in this together. We need to support each other, and we need to do something positive with the time we have in this human realm. There's great opportunities for us, and there's great benefit that can be had from practicing the spiritual path. So have love and compassion for all. And now we're coming to the end of this talk. I'm going to have to go. I can't spend much more time. Sorry if I didn't get through to all your questions. But again, at the end of the session, then just take some time to dedicate the merit, any positivity that might have arisen from this kind of discussion, this interaction, and dedicate it to the benefit of all sentient beings throughout limitless space, so they may achieve final awakening and be free from endless suffering in the 6 realms of samsara. And thank you so much for joining me. In a couple of weeks, then I'm going to go to the monastery in Scotland. So I'll be in Iceland, Scotland, and England for a few days. I have to sort out some things there. They've been left for 13 years in the monastery. I've got to sort my stuff out. But I will try to post some videos on my journey. I guess a bit of entertainment, right? It's kind of, people like these YouTube bloggers, etc. They like to look in to see what they're doing in their lives. And so on that journey, then I would try my best to take you along with me. And I'll visit Amaravati. It's a little Theravadan temple in England, the retreat center in Scotland, and the monastery in Semiling as well. That might be interesting. And also there's a little center in Iceland, and so maybe I will try to do a video there. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'll do another live stream next week, but maybe the one after that will be difficult. There may be some interruptions. And until next time, and all the best, and see you later.